The gun barrel pressed cold against her temple, and Tabitha King realized that hiring a stranger to escort her across 2,000 miles of lawless territory might have been the worst decision of her life. 3 weeks ago, she'd been sipping tea in her father's Boston study. Now she stood in Wyoming dust, watching her hired guide, a man with secrets darker than the storm clouds gathering overhead, face down armed riders who wanted him dead. And somehow, impossibly, she refused to let them take him. Before we ride into this tale of dust danger and unplanned devotion, hit that subscribe button, saddle up for the full journey, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel across this wild, beautiful world. Cheyenne, Wyoming smelled like horse manure and broken dreams. Tabitha King stepped off the train and immediately regretted every decision that had led her here. The platform shook under her boots. Men stared, not politely, not kindly. She clutched her carpet bag tighter. 3 massive steamer trunks sat beside her. Silk dresses, leather-bound books. Her entire Boston life packed and ready to carry west. "Miss King." She turned. The man standing there couldn't have been more than 30. Tall, lean, sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of winter rivers, gray-blue and impossibly clear. A worn Stetson shadowed his face. A Colt revolver sat on his hip like it belonged there. This wasn't the weathered, old trail guide her father had promised. "I'm looking for Jacob Vaughn," she said. "I was told he'd be older." Something flickered across his features. Amusement, maybe, or bitterness. "I'm Vaughn. You're late. Train was supposed to arrive 2 hours ago." "The train doesn't answer to my schedule, Mr. Vaughn, any more than I answer to yours." His gaze moved past her to the trunks. "Those yours?" "Of course they're mine. My belongings for the journey to Oregon. My father sent specifications." "Your father sent money and a letter saying you needed escort to Portland. He didn't say anything about hauling a damned mansion across the plains." Jacob moved toward the trunks, flipped open the nearest one. Silk dresses spilled out like watercolor paintings. He slammed it shut. "No." "Excuse me. You heard me." He turned those cold eyes on her. "We've got 1,800 miles ahead of us. Mountains. Deserts. Rivers that'll swallow a wagon whole. You bring those trunks, you'll be dead before we hit South Pass." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Mr. Vaughn, I don't know what arrangement you made with my father, but I am not some helpless—" "You want helpless?" He stepped closer. She caught the scent of leather and sage. "Helpless is when the axle breaks 50 miles from water because you're carrying too much weight. Helpless is when Sioux raiders spot your fancy dresses and figure you're worth taking. Helpless is freezing to death in the Rockies because you chose silk over wool. How dare you? I dare because your father paid me to get you to Oregon alive, not comfortable." His voice dropped, went quiet in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting. "1 trunk, 40 pounds maximum, practical clothing, warm blanket, personal items that matter. Everything else gets sold or stored." Her hands clenched into fists. 6 months of planning. Each dress carefully selected, each book chosen. Her entire future reduced to 40 pounds by a stranger with ice in his eyes. "And if I refuse, then I give your father his money back and you find another guide." Jacob tipped his hat, turned to walk away. "Good luck with that. Most men who'd take a woman alone across the territories aren't the kind you want to be alone with." Tabitha looked around the platform. Rough men everywhere. Their eyes tracked her movements, weighing possibilities. A woman alone in Cheyenne was prey. "Wait!" Jacob stopped but didn't turn around. "1 trunk," she said, hated how her voice shook. 40 pounds, but I choose what goes in it." Now he turned. Something in his expression had shifted. Respect, maybe. "Fair enough. We leave at dawn. There's a boarding house 2 streets over Mrs. Henderson's place. Tell her I sent you. Get some sleep, Miss King. Starting tomorrow, soft beds become a memory." He walked away before she could respond. His boots struck the wooden platform in a steady rhythm that somehow sounded like a warning. Tabitha didn't sleep. She spent the night surrounded by the contents of 3 trunks, making impossible choices. The green silk dress her mother had commissioned left behind. The complete works of Shakespeare, leather-bound and precious, left behind. The silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother that made the cut. Barely. By dawn, she'd reduced her entire Boston life to 1 trunk, 3 practical dresses, 2 pairs of sturdy boots, wool stockings, a warm coat, the hairbrush, her journal, and a single photograph of her parents. 42 pounds. Close enough. She found Jacob outside the livery stable checking the rigging on 2 horses and a pack mule. He glanced at her trunk, lifted it with one hand, testing the weight. 42, Tabitha said before he could ask. Close enough. He secured it to the mule with practiced efficiency. You ride. I've had lessons. That's not what I asked. She thought of the gentle mare she'd ridden in Boston Common, walking in sedate circles while her instructor called encouragement. Not really. Honest answer. I appreciate that. Jacob gestured to a sorrel mare with kind eyes. This is Rosie. She's patient, but she's not stupid. Treat her right, she'll take care of you. Treat her wrong, you'll find yourself walking to Oregon. Tabitha approached slowly. Let Rosie sniff her hand. The mare's nose felt soft as velvet. Hello, girl. You know how to mount? Left foot in the stirrup swing, the right leg over. Then do it. It took 3 tries, and Jacob's steadying hand on her elbow a touch that sent unexpected warmth through her arm before she sat properly in the saddle. The ground looked impossibly far away. How does it feel? Jacob asked. Terrifying. Good. Fear keeps you careful. He swung onto his own horse, a tall black gelding with a white star on its forehead, with the ease of a man born in the saddle. We're heading northwest out of Cheyenne, following the Oregon Trail to Fort Laramie. That's about 80 miles, 5 or 6 days, depending on weather and trouble. You do what I say when I say it, no questions. Understood. I'm not a child, Mr. Vaughn. Then don't act like one. He nudged his horse forward. Rosie followed without prompting, leaving Tabitha scrambling to understand the reins. They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern plains. Tabitha looked back once at the ramshackle town, at the train station where she'd arrived full of naive dreams. Goodbye, she thought. Goodbye to everything I was. The first day nearly broke her. Jacob set a relentless pace, not fast but constant. Hour after hour, with only brief stops to rest the horses. Her thighs screamed, her back ached. Her hands soft from years of holding nothing heavier than a pen blistered around the reins, until Jacob finally noticed and wrapped them in strips of cloth. No words, just efficiency. They spoke little. Jacob rode ahead, eyes constantly scanning the horizon, one hand never far from the rifle in his saddle scabbard. She found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The easy way he moved with his horse, the tension that never quite left his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on distant ridges, expecting trouble. Why do you keep watching the hills? She asked finally, her voice hoarse from dust and thirst. Because that's where danger comes from. Are we in danger now? We're always in danger. Jacob glanced back at her. This isn't Boston, Miss King. Out here, safety is an illusion, and help is usually 200 miles away. You learn to watch, or you die surprised. The words should have frightened her. Instead, she felt something else. A strange thrill, like the first moment of free fall before fear sets in. That evening, Jacob made camp in a hollow between 2 low hills. He worked with efficient precision, hobbling the horses, gathering deadwood, building a fire. Tabitha watched, feeling useless. Can I help? You know how to make coffee. I've watched our cook. Watching and doing are different things. but he handed her the coffee pot and a pouch of grounds. Water from the canteen, 3 handfuls of coffee, set it on the edge of the fire. Don't let it boil hard or it'll taste like dirt. She knelt by the fire, painfully aware of his eyes on her as she worked. The pot balanced awkwardly on the rocks. The coffee grounds spilled more than they poured. But eventually steam rose, carrying the bitter, rich scent of brewing coffee. Something like approval crossed Jacob's face. Not bad for a first try. High praise from you, I'm sure. I don't give praise I don't mean. They ate in silence. Hardtack and dried beef that Tabitha had to force down. Nothing like the meals she was accustomed to. The sun sank. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. She pulled her coat tighter, shivering. Cold? Jacob asked. I'm fine. You're shaking hard enough to rattle your teeth. He stood, retrieved a thick wool blanket from his pack, and dropped it around her shoulders. Pride's a fine thing, Miss King, but it won't keep you warm. Out here you learn to accept help or you freeze. The blanket smelled like horse and smoke and something else. Something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Thank you, she said quietly. Jacob nodded, settled back against his saddle. The fire crackled between them. In the dancing light, he looked younger somehow, less guarded. Can I ask you something? Tabitha ventured. You just did. How do you know my father? The question landed like a stone in still water. Jacob's expression closed off, went distant. That's between him and me. He hired you to escort me across 1,800 miles of wilderness. I think I have a right to know. You have a right to get to Oregon safely. That's what you paid for. The rest is my business. Jacob stood abruptly, grabbed his rifle. I'm going to check the perimeter. Stay by the fire. Don't wander off. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the flames and a dozen unanswered questions. She woke to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. For a moment, Tabitha couldn't place where she was. The ground too hard, the air too cold, the stars overhead too bright. Then memory crashed back. Wyoming, the trail. Jacob Vaughn. Jacob. The shouts were coming from a small settlement they'd passed at sunset. Jacob had wanted to push on, but darkness had forced them to camp nearby. She sat up, heart hammering. The fire had burned down to embers. Jacob's bedroll lay empty. Mr. Vaughn, she called softly. No answer. More shouts. Then a sound that turned her blood to ice. A gunshot, sharp and clear in the night air. Tabitha scrambled to her feet, every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden. But something stronger pulled her forward. Concern for the man who'd wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, who'd taught her to make coffee, who carried secrets in his Winter River eyes. She moved through the darkness toward the yellow glow of windows. The scene inside the saloon stopped her in the doorway. Jacob stood in the center of the room, facing 3 men who'd spread out in a loose semicircle. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. His right hand hovered near his holster, steady as stone. The other patrons had pressed themselves against the walls, giving the combatants space. You should have stayed down, boy, one of the men growled, bull-shouldered, scarred face. Nobody calls me a cheat in my own game. I didn't call you a cheat, Jacob said, that dangerous quiet in his voice. I called you a clumsy cheat. There's a difference. The scarred man lunged. What happened next burned itself into Tabitha's memory, in fragments, Jacob sidestepping like water, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. Crack of bone on bone. The second attacker rushing in, knife flashing. Jacob catching the wrist, twisting until the knife clattered away. Movement too fast to follow. Suddenly, 2 men lay groaning on the floor, while the third backed toward the door with his hands raised. We're done here, Jacob said. Blood dripped from his knuckles. The hell we are. The third man's hand dove for his gun. Jacob's revolver cleared leather in a blur of motion. The hammer clicked back with terrible finality. I said we're done. The man froze. The entire saloon held its breath. Then Tabitha stepped through the doorway, and every eye in the room turned toward her. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, kept her voice level despite her racing heart. "I believe we have an early start tomorrow." Jacob's gaze flicked to her. Something unreadable crossed his features. Surprise, maybe, or concern. He lowered the revolver but didn't holster it. "Miss King, you should be at camp. And you should be there with me." She moved into the room with more confidence than she felt, aware of the dangerous men surrounding her, aware that she'd just stepped into something she didn't fully understand. "Unless you'd rather explain to my father why his money was spent on saloon brawls instead of safe passage." A muscle jumped in Jacob's jaw. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then he spun the revolver, once a showy gesture that made several men flinch, and slid it back into his holster. "You're right, Miss King. My apologies." He touched the brim of his hat to the room at large, his eyes never leaving the three men. "Gentlemen, pleasure doing business with you." He walked toward her, and she noticed for the first time how he favored his left side, how shallow his breathing was. Injured then. The fight had cost him more than blood from a cut eye. Jacob took her elbow gently despite everything and guided her out of the saloon. They walked in silence back toward camp. The weight of what had just happened settled over her like a heavy coat. "That was foolish," Jacob said finally. "Which part? The fighting or my interruption?" "Both." But there was no anger in his voice, just bone-deep weariness. "You could have been hurt. So could you. I know what I'm doing." "Do you—" Tabitha stopped walking, forced him to face her. In the moonlight, his face looked carved from shadow and exhaustion. "Because from where I stood, it looked like you were about to shoot a man over a card game." "He drew first." "You provoked him. He was cheating a ranch hand out of 6 months' wages. Someone needed to call it. And that someone had to be you." Frustration bled into her voice. "We've been on the trail less than 2 days, Mr. Vaughn, and you're already picking fights in saloons. What happens when we're 100 miles from the nearest town? When there's no one to pull you out of whatever trouble your conscience lands you in?" Jacob's expression went cold, distant. "Your father didn't hire me to be careful, Miss King. He hired me to get you to Oregon. How I do that is my business. And if you get yourself killed in the process, what then? Then you hire another guide. You stubborn, infuriating—" She cut herself off, fists clenched at her sides. "I don't want another guide. I want the one I have to use sense." Something shifted in Jacob's eyes, surprise again, and something softer underneath. "Why?" "Because—" She stopped, suddenly aware that she was standing too close to him, that her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the violence she'd witnessed. "Because my father trusted you. And that means something." Jacob looked away, his jaw tight. "Your father shouldn't trust me." "Why not?" "Because I'm not the man he thinks I am." The words came out rough, almost angry. "I'm not anyone's hero, Miss King. I'm just—" He stopped, shook his head. "We should get back to camp." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the darkness with more questions than answers, and a dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. Dawn came too soon. They rode in silence. The tension from the night before hung between them like smoke. Jacob's eye had turned purple, spreading across his cheekbone like spilled ink. He never mentioned the fight, never explained what had driven him into that saloon, or why he'd risked everything over a stranger's lost wages. But Tabitha noticed things. She noticed how Jacob always positioned himself between her and approaching riders, how he gave her the better cuts of dried meat without drawing attention to it, how he taught her small things, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to listen for sounds that didn't belong, how to trust the horse's instincts when her own failed her. "You're learning," he said on the third evening as she successfully built the fire without his help. "I have a good teacher. You have good instincts. That's different." Jacob poured coffee, handed her a tin cup. Most Eastern folks come west expecting it to bend to them. You're learning to bend with it. The compliment, small as it was, warmed her more than the fire. That night under stars, too thick to count, Tabitha finally asked the question that had been burning in her since that first afternoon. "Why did my father hire you specifically?" Jacob stared into his coffee. Long silence. Then, "I saved his life once. Or he saved mine. Depends on how you look at it." "What does that mean?" "Means I owed him a debt." Jacob's voice went flat, emotionless. "I was 17 running with the wrong crowd. Stole from the wrong people, ended up with a price on my head. Your father found me hiding in his Boston warehouse half dead from a knife wound. He should have turned me in. Instead, he got me out of the city, gave me money and a chance to disappear west." Tabitha's breath caught. "You were a thief." "I was a lot of things I'm not proud of." Jacob met her eyes across the fire. "Your father made me promise that if he ever needed help, I'd come. When his letter arrived asking me to escort you to Oregon, I knew I couldn't refuse. Didn't matter that I'd spent 10 years trying to become someone different. Debts like that don't expire." "Is that why you took the job? Obligation?" "At first." Something flickered across his face. "Now I'm not so sure anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Tabitha's pulse hammered in her throat. "Jacob!" A sound cut through the night, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders. Coming fast. Jacob was on his feet before she could move, his hand on his rifle, eyes scanning the darkness. "How many?" she whispered. 3, maybe 4. His voice had gone hard, focused. "Could be nothing. Could be trouble." Tabitha finished. "Yeah." Jacob grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the horses. "We're breaking camp. Now." "But our supplies—" "Leave them. We can replace supplies. We can't replace lives." They worked in frantic silence, throwing saddles on horses, securing the most essential items. The hoofbeats grew louder, and with them came voices. Rough, excited, hunting voices. "There, I see their fire." Jacob cursed, vaulted onto his black gelding. "Ride, Tabitha. Don't look back, don't slow down. Follow me and for God's sake stay in the saddle." He spurred his horse forward. Rosie leaped after him without prompting. Tabitha clung to the saddle horn as they plunged into darkness, the ground disappearing beneath them, the night air whipping her face. Behind them, men shouted. A gunshot cracked the air. And Tabitha King, proper Boston writer who'd never broken a rule in her life, discovered what it felt like to be prey. They rode hard through the darkness, Jacob leading them away from the trail into rougher country. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the burning in her lungs and the desperate prayer that Rosie wouldn't stumble on unseen ground. Another gunshot. Closer this time. "Jacob!" she screamed. "Keep riding!" They crested a rise, plunged down into a dry creek bed. Jacob pulled up suddenly. She nearly collided with his horse. "Dismount," he commanded. "Lead your horse into those rocks. Don't make a sound." They scrambled into a tumble of boulders just as the pursuers topped the rise. She pressed against cold stone, one hand on Rosie's neck to keep her quiet, her heart beating so loud she was certain it would give them away. 3 riders appeared in the moonlight, hard men with harder eyes scanning the landscape. "Lost them," one growled. "Can't have gone far. Spread out, check the creek bed." Jacob's hand found hers in the darkness. Squeezed once. A message. "Stay quiet. Stay still. Trust me." She squeezed back. The riders moved closer. One dismounted, began checking the ground for tracks. Tabitha held her breath, counted her heartbeats, prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. The man moved toward their hiding place. Closer. Closer. His boot was 3 feet from where Jacob crouched when a coyote howled in the distance. The sound split the night, wild and eerie. "Forget it," another rider called. "They're gone. We'll pick up the trail at dawn." "Porter's not going to be happy." "Porter can go to hell. I'm not chasing ghosts in the dark." They mounted up, rode away. But Jacob didn't move, didn't release her hand, didn't speak until the hoofbeats faded into silence, and even the echo of echoes had died away. "Who was that?" Tabitha whispered finally. "Bounty hunters. Looking for you." Jacob's silence was answer enough. She felt the world tilt slightly, reality reshaping itself around this new information. Her guide, the man her father trusted, the man she'd begun to trust, was running from something, someone. "The debt you owed my father," she said slowly. "It's not the only one, is it?" "No." Jacob's voice was hollow. "It's not. How much is the bounty?" $500. Dead or alive." The words hit like fists. $500. Enough to tempt anyone. Enough to make her a target just for traveling with him. "You should have told me," Tabitha said. "Would you have still come?" She stopped, realized she didn't know the answer. "What did you do?" "Killed a man." Jacob finally released her hand, moved away. He deserved it, but the law didn't see it that way. Been running for 3 years. "And you thought escorting me across the country was a good idea." "I thought I could keep you safe. I thought—" His voice cracked. "I thought the bounty had gone cold. I was wrong." Tabitha looked at him in the moonlight. This man of contradictions and secrets. This criminal who'd saved her father. This guide who'd wrapped blankets around her shoulders and taught her to build fires and put himself between her and danger without hesitation. Her mind raced. The smart thing would be to turn back, hire another guide, someone without a price on his head. The safe thing. The reasonable thing. "We keep going," she said. Jacob's head snapped around. "What?" "You heard me. We keep going. To Fort Laramie, then to Oregon, just like we planned." "Tabitha, there are men hunting me. Professional killers who won't hesitate to hurt you if you get in their way. You need to hire another guide, someone without—" "No. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly, Mr. Vaughn." She stood, faced him directly. "You made a promise to my father. I'm holding you to it. We're going to Oregon." "You're insane." "Perhaps." She felt something fierce and wild rising in her chest. Something that had nothing to do with reason or safety. "But I'm also the woman who hired you, and unless you plan to drag me back to Cheyenne against my will, we're finishing this journey together." Jacob stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Frustration, admiration, something darker that made her pulse quicken. "You're going to be the death of me," he said finally. "Or you'll be the making of me." She surprised herself with the words, with how much truth they carried. "Now are we going to stand here arguing all night, or are we going to put more distance between us and those bounty hunters?" A slow smile crossed Jacob's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features from harsh to something almost beautiful. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "We ride." They moved through what remained of the night, pushing north by northwest toward Fort Laramie. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, with danger behind them and uncertainty ahead, Tabitha realized something. The journey she'd planned, a simple escort across safe territory, had become something else entirely. She'd hired a guide. She'd found a mystery. And whether she admitted it or not, she was starting to fall for both. They rode through this pre-dawn darkness with the kind of urgency that left no room for conversation. Jacob kept them off the main trail, picking his way through rougher terrain that would make tracking harder. Tabitha's legs burned. Her hands ached where the reins bit into the cloth wrappings. But she didn't complain. Couldn't complain. Not when she'd been the one to insist they continue. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Jacob finally slowed the pace, glanced back at her. "You holding up?" "I'm fine." "That's the third time you've said that since yesterday. I'm starting to think you don't know what fine actually means." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the knowledge that men with guns were hunting them, Tabitha almost smiled. "I'm still in the saddle, aren't I?" "For now." But there was something in his voice that sounded almost like approval. "We'll rest the horses in an hour. There's a creek bed ahead where we can water them and eat something." "How much further to Fort Laramie?" 3 days. Maybe 4 if Porter and his men are smart enough to watch the trail. Jacob's jaw tightened. "We'll have to take the long way around. Add another day, but it's safer." "You know him. This Porter." It wasn't a question. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah, I know him." "From before?" "From before." He didn't elaborate, and Tabitha knew better than to push. Not yet. Not when the wounds from last night were still so fresh. They rode in silence until Jacob found the creek bed he'd mentioned. A thin trickle of water ran between smooth stones. Cottonwood trees provided shade. It wasn't much, but after hours in the saddle, it felt like paradise. Tabitha slid off Rosie with less grace than she would have liked. Her legs nearly buckled. Jacob caught her elbow, steadied her. "Easy." "I'm fine." There's that word again. But his hand lingered on her arm a moment longer than necessary. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist just above where the cloth wrapping ended. The touch sent heat spiraling up her arm, settled somewhere in her chest that made breathing difficult. Then he released her and turned away, leading his horse to the water. Tabitha stood there trying to remember how her lungs worked. This was dangerous. This feeling that bloomed every time he touched her, every time those winter river eyes met hers. She was supposed to be a practical woman. A woman who understood that attraction and trust were 2 very different things. But her heart didn't seem to understand the distinction. She led Rosie to the creek, knelt beside the horse, and splashed cold water on her face. The shock of it helped, cleared her head. Jacob had already started gathering wood for a fire. Small, efficient movements. Everything he did carried that same quality, no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes. "Can I ask you something?" Tabitha said. "Seems like you're going to regardless of my answer." "The man you killed, what did he do?" Jacob's hands stilled on the kindling. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sat back on his heels, stared at the small pile of wood he'd assembled. His name was Samuel Garrett. He owned a ranch outside of Laramie. Good ranch, good reputation. Jacob's voice went flat, emotionless. He also had a wife named Sarah, who showed up at the general store every few weeks with new bruises, new excuses, new reasons why she was so clumsy, so accident-prone. Tabitha's stomach tightened. Everyone knew, Jacob continued. The whole town knew what he was doing to her. But Samuel Garrett had money, had influence, had friends in the law, so everyone looked the other way. What happened? I was working on a neighboring ranch. Saw Sarah one day with her arm in a sling, bruises around her throat that looked like handprints. Asked if she needed help. She said no, said everything was fine. He struck a match, held it to the kindling. 3 days later, I found her in the barn. She'd hanged herself from the rafters. The words hit Tabitha like a physical blow. "Jacob." I went to Samuel Garrett's ranch that night. Didn't plan to kill him. Just wanted to make him understand what he'd done, what his fists and his rage had cost. Jacob watched the flames grow. He came at me with a rifle. We fought. The gun went off. He died on his fancy parlor floor, and I ran. That's self-defense. That's what I told the sheriff. He didn't believe me. Said I'd gone there looking for trouble, found it, and now had to pay the price. Jacob's laugh was bitter. Turns out money and influence work even after you're dead. Samuel Garrett's friends made sure there was a warrant, made sure there was a bounty, made sure I could never stop running. Tabitha moved to sit beside him. close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made my choice. I knew what it would cost." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. "But I won't apologize for it. Sarah Garrett deserved better than what she got. If killing the man who drove her to that rope is the price I have to pay, then so be it." "You're not a murderer, Jacob Vaughn." "The law disagrees." "The law is wrong." He studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You really believe that?" "I believe you." The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "I believe that sometimes the world is cruel and unjust, and sometimes good people have to do hard things. I believe my father saw something in you worth saving. And I believe—" She stopped, uncertain how to finish the sentence, how to explain this feeling that had taken root in her chest and refused to be dislodged. "What do you believe, Tabitha?" Her name in his voice sounded different, intimate, like a secret shared between them. "I believe we're going to make it to Oregon," she said finally. "Together." Jacob's hand found hers in the space between them. His fingers laced through hers, rough and calloused and warm. "I hope you're right." They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn. Hands clasped, neither one willing to break the connection. Finally, Jacob stirred. "We should eat something. Move on before the heat gets too bad." But he didn't release her hand immediately, and when he did, Tabitha felt the loss of it like a physical thing. They ate quickly, more hardtack, and dried beef washed down with creek water that tasted faintly of minerals and earth. Then Jacob kicked dirt over the fire, and they mounted up again. Back into the saddle, back onto the trail, back into the endless rhythm of hoofbeats and dust and distance. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had crumbled, and now they existed in a space that felt both more dangerous and more necessary than before. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Jacob led them through territory that grew progressively rougher hills that climbed into low mountains valleys thick with brush and hidden gullies. Twice he made them stop while he scouted ahead on foot. Twice he came back satisfied that the way was clear. "You're being careful," Tabitha observed. "I'm being smart. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Careful means you're afraid. Smart means you respect the danger." Jacob adjusted his hat, squinted at the sun. "Fear makes you hesitate. Respect makes you prepared." "And which one are you?" "Both, if I'm honest." He glanced at her. "Mostly because if something happens to you, your father will find a way to kill me, even if I'm already dead." "My father is a banker, not a gunfighter." "Your father is a man who once pulled a half-dead thief out of his warehouse and gave him a second chance at life. That kind of man can be more dangerous than any gunfighter." Jacob's expression grew distant. "He told me once that the world has enough violence, enough cruelty. Said the only way to fight it was to choose mercy whenever possible, justice when necessary." "That sounds like him." "He also said that if I ever betrayed his trust, he'd make sure I regretted it for whatever remained of my miserable existence." Jacob's lips quirked. "So yeah, I'm motivated to keep you safe." "Is that the only reason?" The question hung in the air between them. Jacob didn't answer immediately, didn't look at her, just kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, one hand resting on his thigh, the other loose on the reins. "No," he said finally. Quiet, almost reluctant. "That's not the only reason." Tabitha's heart kicked against her ribs. "Jacob, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't ask me to explain something I don't fully understand myself. Don't ask me to make promises I might not be able to keep. Just—" He exhaled hard. "Just know that getting you to Oregon safely matters to me, more than it probably should." "Why shouldn't it matter?" "Because I'm a wanted man, Tabitha. Because every day we travel together, you're at risk. Because when we finally reach Portland, you're going to start whatever new life you've planned, and I'm going to disappear back into whatever shadows will hide me." His jaw clenched. There's no future here. No happy ending. Just a job that needs finishing, and then goodbye. The words should have hurt, should have created distance. Instead, they just made her angry. You don't get to decide that. Excuse me. You don't get to decide what I want or what I'm willing to risk. Tabitha urged Rosie forward until she rode alongside him, close enough to see the surprise in his eyes. You don't get to make choices for me based on what you think is best or safest or most practical. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from difficult truths or dangerous men. I never said you were fragile. Then stop treating me like I am. Heat flooded her cheeks. I chose to continue this journey knowing you have a bounty on your head. I chose to trust you despite everything. And if I choose to... She stopped, suddenly aware that she was about to say something that would change everything between them. Choose to what? Jacob had pulled his horse to a stop, was watching her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. To care what happens to you, she finished. Softer now, almost a whisper. You don't get to tell me that's wrong or foolish or impossible. It is foolish. Maybe, but it's my choice to make. They stared at each other. The world around them, the mountains, the brush, the endless sky seemed to fade until there was only this two people on horseback in the middle of nowhere, balanced on the edge of something neither one fully understood. Jacob was the first to look away. We should keep moving, he said, his voice rougher than before. We've got another few hours before we need to make camp. He nudged his horse forward without waiting for her response. Tabitha followed, her heart still racing, her hands trembling slightly on the reins. She'd done it. Said something she couldn't take back. Revealed something she'd barely admitted to herself. And now she had to live with whatever came next. They rode until the sun touched the western horizon, painting the mountains in shades of purple and deep blue. Jacob found a protected hollow surrounded by rocks and scrub pine. Good shelter. Difficult to approach without being seen. We'll camp here, he said. Cold camp tonight. No fire. Why not? Because Porter and his men might have picked up our trail. Fire at night is like hanging a sign that says, "Here we are, come kill us." Jacob swung down from his horse, began unsaddling. We'll eat cold sleep in shifts and be gone before dawn. Tabitha nodded, trying not to show how much the idea of sleeping in shifts, of staying awake in the darkness watching for killers, frightened her. But Jacob must have seen it anyway. Hey, he said quietly. Moved closer. You'll be safe. I promise. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll die before I let anyone hurt you. The words should have been melodramatic, overblown. Instead, they sounded like simple truth. Don't say things like that. Why not? Because... Her voice caught. Because it makes me care even more about what happens to you, and you've already told me that's foolish. Jacob reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. Maybe I was wrong, he said. Maybe caring isn't foolish. Maybe it's the only thing that makes sense in a world gone mad. Then he dropped his hand and turned away, back to unsaddling his horse. Leaving Tabitha standing there, her cheek still warm from his touch, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. They ate in silence as twilight deepened into full dark. Dried fruit and hard cheese, water from the canteen, nothing that required preparation or fire. Afterward, Jacob spread his bedroll in the most protected spot, gestured for her to take it. You sleep first. I'll wake you in 4 hours. Where will you sleep? I won't. Not until you've rested. Jacob, that's not fair. You've been awake as long as I have. I'm used to it. You're not. He settled against a rock rifle across his knees. Sleep, Tabitha. That's not a request. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on fairness and equal treatment. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. 4 hours, she said. Then you wake me. Promise. Promise. She lay down, still fully dressed, boots still on. The ground was hard, the night air already growing cold. But the blanket Jacob had given her days ago still smelled like him, and somehow that made it easier to close her eyes. She woke to Jacob's hand on her shoulder, gentle but insistent. "Your turn," he said quietly. Tabitha sat up, disoriented. The stars overhead had wheeled across the sky. 4 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Everything quiet. So far. Jacob handed her the rifle. "You remember what I taught you about how to hold it, where to aim?" "I remember." "Good. If you see anyone approaching who's not me, you fire a warning shot first. They don't stop, you aim for center mass, and you keep firing until they're down." "Understood." The casual way he talked about killing should have horrified her. Instead, it just felt practical. Necessary. "Understood." "I'll be right here." Jacob gestured to the bedroll she'd just vacated. "You need anything, I'm 10 feet away." He lay down without another word, and within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Tabitha sat in the darkness, rifle across her knees, watching shadows and listening to night sounds. An owl called somewhere in the distance. Wind moved through the scrub pine, making them whisper. Rosie shifted her bridle, jingling softly. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But Tabitha found herself studying every shadow, every movement, wondering if it was just the wind or something more dangerous. The hours crawled past. Her eyes burned with the effort of staying alert. Her back ached from sitting against the rock. But she didn't move. Didn't wake Jacob. He needed rest as much as she had. Maybe more. She found herself watching him sleep. The way moonlight painted his features in silver and shadow. The vulnerability that only appeared when he wasn't awake to guard it. He looked younger like this. Less haunted. What must it be like, she wondered, to carry the weight he carried? To know that men were hunting you. That one wrong move could mean death. That safety was always temporary, and peace was just an illusion. And yet, he'd taken on the responsibility of escorting her across 1,800 miles of wilderness. Had put himself at even greater risk. Why, just because of a debt to her father? Or was it something more? She thought about the way his hand had felt in hers by the fire. The way his touch against her cheek had sent warmth flooding through her entire body. The way he looked at her sometimes like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve, but didn't quite dare. This was madness. Falling for a wanted man. A criminal. Someone who'd killed another human being regardless of the circumstances or justifications. But Sarah Garrett's face haunted her. A woman driven to such despair by cruelty that she'd chosen death over one more day of suffering. And Jacob Young, probably not much older than 20 at the time, had tried to make it right, had confronted the man responsible, had paid the price for seeking justice when the law refused to. That wasn't a criminal. That was someone with a conscience that wouldn't let him look away from injustice. The kind of man her father would save, would trust, would send his daughter across the country with. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east when Jacob stirred, sat up slowly, reaching for his hat. "Everything quiet?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Everything quiet." "Good." He stood, rolled his shoulders, took the rifle from her. "You did good, Tabitha." "I didn't do anything, just sat here." "You stayed alert, stayed watchful. That's more than most people can manage after 4 hours in the dark." He offered his hand, helped her to her feet. "Come on, let's get moving before the sun's up." They broke camp quickly, efficiently, the rhythm of it becoming familiar now. Saddle the horses, secure the gear, mount up, ride. The sun broke over the horizon as they picked their way down from the hollow and back toward the trail. "How much further?" Tabitha asked. "To Fort Laramie, 2 days if we push hard." Jacob scanned the landscape ahead. "But I want to scout ahead first. Make sure Porter hasn't set up any surprises." "You really think he's that determined?" $500 is a lot of money, Tabitha. Men have killed for 1/10 of that. His jaw tightened. "And Porter, he's not just in it for the money anymore. He's in it because I made him look like a fool 3 years ago when I escaped his first attempt to collect the bounty. This is personal for him." "What happened?" "He cornered me in a canyon outside of Cheyenne, had me dead to rights. I managed to shoot his horse out from under him, got away in the confusion." Jacob's expression was grim. "He broke 3 ribs when he fell. Word is he's walked with a limp ever since. A man doesn't forget something like that." "So he's hunting you for revenge as much as the money?" "Yeah, which makes him more dangerous. A man hunting for money might give up if the chase gets too hard, the cost too high. A man hunting for revenge?" Jacob shook his head. "He'll follow you to hell itself if that's what it takes." The words settled over them like a shroud. They rode in silence for another hour before Jacob suddenly pulled up short. "What is it?" Tabitha whispered. "Not sure." He was staring at something ahead, something she couldn't see. Then, "Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." He dismounted, moved forward on foot rifle ready. Tabitha's heart hammered in her throat. Every second that passed felt like an hour. Every sound seemed amplified. Then Jacob was coming back, moving fast. "We've got company," he said. 3 riders, coming up the trail from the south." "Porter?" "Can't tell from this distance, but we're not waiting around to find out." He vaulted back into the saddle. "There's a game trail to the east. Rough terrain, but it'll get us out of sight. Follow me and stay close." They plunged off the main trail into brush, so thick it tore at Tabitha's skirts and scratched her arms. Jacob led them through with the sureness of a man who'd spent his life reading the land. Up a steep incline, down into a ravine, through water that came up to the horse's knees. Behind them, she heard shouts. "There, I saw them. After them." Jacob cursed, urged his horse faster. The chase was on. The world became a blur of motion and terror. Rosie's muscles bunched and stretched beneath Tabitha as they crashed through brush that clawed at her face and arms. Jacob stayed ahead, his black gelding leaping obstacles that appeared without warning. A fallen log, a washout. Rocks that could shatter a horse's leg if they landed wrong. Tabitha's lungs burned. Her hands ached from gripping the reins. But she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Not with the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. "How many?" she gasped. 3 confirmed, maybe more. Jacob glanced back, his face tight with concentration. "They're good riders. We can't outrun them on this terrain. Then what do? We get somewhere defensible, and we make a stand." He veered sharply left, heading up a rocky slope that made the horses scramble for purchase. "There's a ridge ahead, old mining camp. If we can reach it before they catch us, we might have a chance." Tabitha didn't ask what kind of chance. Didn't want to know. Just focused on staying in the saddle, on trusting Rosie to keep her footing, on following Jacob through this nightmare. A gunshot cracked the air. Too close. The bullet whined past her head, and she flinched so hard she nearly lost her seat. "Stay low," Jacob shouted. "Make yourself small." She pressed herself against Rosie's neck, making her body as tiny a target as possible. Another shot. This one kicked up dirt to her left. The men behind them were finding their range. The slope grew steeper. Rosie's breath came in great heaving gasps. Foam flecked her neck. But the mare didn't falter, didn't slow, just kept climbing, because that's what was asked of her. They crested the ridge, and suddenly there it was. The mining camp Jacob had mentioned. A handful of abandoned buildings, half collapsed and weathered gray. A shaft entrance disappearing into darkness. Rusted equipment scattered like bones. Jacob didn't hesitate. He rode straight for the largest building, what had probably once been the main office or bunkhouse. Dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. "Inside. Now." Tabitha slid from Rosie's back, her legs nearly buckling. Jacob caught her, steadied her. "Can you shoot?" he asked. Already moving, already pulling his rifle from its scabbard. I've never shot anyone." "That's not what I asked." He thrust the rifle into her hands. "Can you point this at a man and pull the trigger if he's trying to kill us?" She looked at the weapon. Heavy, cold, deadly. Then looked at Jacob's face. At the determination there, the grim acceptance of what was coming. "Yes," she said, surprised by how steady her voice was. "Yes, I can." "Good." He pulled his revolver, checked the cylinder. "Get to that window on the right. Stay low. If anyone comes up that slope who isn't me, you fire. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just shoot." "Where will you be?" "The other window, covering the opposite approach." He met her eyes. "We hold them here until dark. Then we slip out and keep moving. Understood?" "Understood." He started to move away, then stopped, turned back, cupped her face in his hand. "Tabitha, whatever happens, don't." She covered his hand with hers. "Don't say goodbye. We're both walking out of here." Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or just desperate want to believe her. "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you took the job." He almost smiled. Then he kissed her. Hard and fast and full of everything they hadn't said yet. Everything they might never get the chance to say. When he pulled back, her lips felt branded. Her heart raced for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Hold that thought," he said. "We're not done with this conversation." Then he was moving to the other window, dropping into position. All business now. All focus. Tabitha took her place at the right window, settled the rifle against her shoulder, the way Jacob had taught her days ago, sighted down the barrel at the slope they'd just climbed. Her hands shook. She forced them steady. The seconds stretched like hours. Every sound amplified. The creak of old wood, the wind through broken walls, her own breathing too fast, too loud. Then she saw them. 3 riders cresting the ridge, coming slow now, cautious. They'd seen the buildings, knew their quarry was cornered. The lead rider was big, broad-shouldered. Even from this distance, she could see the cruelty in the set of his jaw, the way he sat his horse like a man who enjoyed other people's fear. Porter. Had to be. "I see them," Jacob called from his window. 3 men, Porter in front, 2 hired guns behind him. "What do? We wait. Let them make the first move. Maybe they'll decide the bounty isn't worth dying for." But Tabitha could hear the doubt in his voice. These men hadn't chased them through rough country for hours just to give up now. Porter pulled his horse to a stop about 50 yards out. Close enough to talk, far enough to make a difficult shot. "Jacob Vaughn." His voice carried across the distance. Rough, mocking. "Come on out, boy. Let's finish what we started 3 years ago." Jacob didn't respond, didn't move from his position. "I know you're in there," Porter continued. "Tracked you all the way from Cheyenne. You and that fancy Boston lady. Speaking of which," he raised his voice. "Miss King, you in there too? You know the man you hired is wanted for murder. Know there's a price on his head." Tabitha's finger tightened on the trigger. She wanted to shoot him just for the satisfaction of wiping that smug tone out of his voice. "Don't," Jacob said quietly, not looking at her, eyes fixed on the men outside. "That's what he wants. Wants us to waste ammunition. Wants us to reveal our positions. He's talking about me like I'm not even here. He's trying to get under your skin. Don't let him." Jacob shifted slightly, adjusting his aim. "Stay calm. Stay ready." Porter was talking again. "Here's how this is going to work, Vaughn. You come out peaceful like hands up, and I take you in. The lady can ride on to Oregon, no harm done. She doesn't need to be part of this. And if I don't come out, then we burn you out, set fire to that old tinderbox you're hiding in, and shoot you when you run. Your choice, easy way or hard way." Jacob's jaw clenched. He's not bluffing. That wood's dry as bone. It'll go up like kindling. Then what do? We don't give him time to act on the threat. Jacob's eyes narrowed. When I say go, you shoot at the man on Porter's right. Don't try for a kill shot. Just make him take cover. I'll handle the other one. What about Porter? He's mine. The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just about the bounty anymore. This was personal. 3 years of running, of looking over his shoulder, of being hunted like an animal. All of it had led to this moment. Jacob, I know what I'm doing, Tabitha. Trust me. I do trust you. That's not what I'm worried about. He glanced at her then. Quick, but long enough for her to see the understanding in his eyes. She wasn't worried about him failing. She was worried about what it would cost him to succeed. Porter's reaching for something, Jacob said, his voice gone flat. Looks like a torch. Damn it, he's really going to do it. Time's up, Vaughn, Porter called. Last chance to do this the smart way. Now, Jacob said. Go! Tabitha swung her rifle toward the man on the right and fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, knocked her back a step. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard 2 more shots. Saw Porter's men dive from their horses, scrambling for cover. Porter himself wheeled his mount, dropped the torch he'd been lighting, went for his gun. Jacob fired, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Porter's horse screamed and went down. Porter rolled clear, came up firing. A bullet punched through the wall 6 inches from Tabitha's head. Down! Jacob shouted. She dropped below the window line, heart hammering. Splinters rained down as more bullets tore through the ancient wood. You all right? Jacob called. Yes. Are you? So far. More gunfire. The building shook with the impact. Tabitha realized with sick certainty that Porter had been right. This old structure wouldn't hold up to sustained fire. Already she could see daylight through the walls where bullets had torn through. We need to move, she said. This building won't protect us much longer. Working on it. Jacob fired twice more. There's a back way out. Leads to the mine shaft entrance, if we can reach it. An explosion of breaking glass cut him off. Something sailed through the window on his side. Small, round, smoking. A grenade. Run! Jacob lunged across the room, grabbed Tabitha's arm, dragged her toward the back door. They crashed through it just as the world turned white and loud. The blast picked them up and threw them forward like children's toys. Tabitha hit the ground hard, all the air leaving her lungs in a rush. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Just pain and ringing ears and smoke. Then Jacob was there, pulling her up, half carrying her toward the dark mouth of the mine shaft. Keep moving. Don't stop. She stumbled forward. Her ears still rang. Blood ran hot down her cheek from a cut she didn't remember getting. But her legs worked. Her lungs dragged in air. She was alive. They plunged into the darkness of the shaft just as gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets sparked off stone, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Jacob pulled her deeper into the mine. Into darkness so complete she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. Could only follow his grip on her arm, trust him to lead them somewhere safe, somewhere survivable. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them. Voices. Footsteps. The scrape of boots on stone. They're coming, Tabitha whispered. I know. Jacob's voice was close to her ear. Feel this wall. Follow it. There's a side tunnel about 20 feet ahead. We go in there, find a place to make a stand. They moved through the blackness. Tabitha's free hand trailing along rough stone. Every sense heightened. Every sound magnified. The rasp of her breathing. The drip of water somewhere deep. The distant voices of men who wanted them dead. Then Jacob was pulling her left, into the side tunnel he'd mentioned. Deeper. Darker. Until even the faint light from the entrance had disappeared completely. Here, he said. Crouch down. Stay quiet. She obeyed. felt him settle beside her. So close she could feel the heat from his body, hear his controlled breathing. The slight wheeze that suggested the explosion had affected him worse than he was letting on. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I'm fine." "Don't lie to me, Jacob Vaughn. Not now." A pause. Then, "Ribs. Maybe cracked. Hurts to breathe deep, but I can still move. Still fight. We can't stay here forever." "We don't have to, just until they give up looking, or until dark." His hand found hers in the blackness, squeezed. "Either way, we wait." Light flickered in the main tunnel. Torches, getting closer. "I know you're in here, Vaughn," Porter's voice echoed off stone walls. "Nowhere left to run. Come out now and I'll make it quick. Keep hiding, and I'll make sure you die slow." Jacob's hand tightened on hers. A warning. "Stay quiet. Stay still." The light grew brighter. Tabitha could see shadows now dancing across the walls of the main tunnel. 2 men, maybe 3. Moving slow, checking each side passage. Her heart beat so loud she was certain they could hear it. Every breath felt like a scream in the silence. The light reached their tunnel, paused. One of Porter's men stood at the entrance, tall, lean. His torch held high, peering into the darkness where they crouched. Tabitha pressed herself against the stone wall, made herself small, invisible, willed him to look away to move on to choose any other tunnel. The man took a step forward, into their tunnel, torchlight reaching toward them like grasping fingers. Another step. If he came much closer, he'd see them, no question, and in this confined space there'd be nowhere to run. Jacob's hand released hers. She heard the whisper of steel, his knife sliding free of its sheath. "Harker." Porter's voice from the main tunnel. "Get back here. They're not down that way. I found fresh tracks heading deeper." The man hesitated, looked one more time into the darkness where they hid, then turned and walked away. Light receding, voices fading, until once again they sat in perfect blackness, hearts pounding, lungs burning with the effort of staying silent. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost meaning in the dark. Finally, Jacob stirred. "They're moving deeper into the mine," he whispered, "looking for us in the wrong direction. This is our chance." "To do what?" "To get out, while they're distracted." He pulled her to her feet. "Stay close. Hand on my shoulder. Let me guide you." They moved back through the darkness, slow, silent. Jacob's hand against the wall feeling their way. The mine entrance appeared ahead, a gray rectangle of daylight that looked impossibly bright after the darkness. Jacob paused at the threshold, peered out, checking for guards, for traps, for any sign of danger. "Clear," he breathed. "Let's move." They emerged into afternoon sunlight that hurt her eyes. The ruined building still smoldered. Their horses were gone, scattered by the explosion or stolen by Porter's men. "We go on foot," Jacob said, already moving, already scanning for the best route away from this place. "There's a creek about a mile north. We follow it downstream, use the water to hide our tracks. With luck, Porter will waste hours searching that mine before he realizes we slipped out. And then we put as much distance between us and him as possible before nightfall." Jacob glanced at her, really looked at her for the first time since the explosion, saw the blood on her face, the cuts on her arms, the way she held herself like something hurt deep inside. "You sure you can walk?" "I'm sure." "Tabitha, I said I'm sure." She met his eyes. "We don't have time for anything else, do we?" He studied her face a moment longer, then nodded. "No, we don't." They ran. Not the desperate, terror-fueled flight of before, but a steady, ground-eating pace that Jacob set with the assurance of a man who knew exactly how far he could push himself, how far he could push her. Her side ached where she'd hit the ground. Every breath pulled at something torn inside. But she kept moving, kept pace with him, refused to be the reason they slowed down, the reason Porter caught them. The creek appeared through the trees, fast-moving water tumbling over smooth stones. Jacob led them straight into it, the shock of cold water stealing her breath. "Walk in the water," he said. "Step on stones where you can. We need to leave no tracks for at least a mile." They waded downstream, water soaking through their boots, weighing them down. The current pulled at their legs, trying to sweep them off their feet. But Jacob's hand stayed firm on her arm, steadying her when she stumbled, guiding her around the deepest parts. Her teeth started chattering. The adrenaline from the fight was wearing off, leaving her cold and shaking, and aware of every injury, every ache, every scream her body was making. "Just a little further," Jacob said. "Then we can get out, find somewhere to rest." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that. I keep not believing you." But there was something gentle in his voice, something that made her chest ache for reasons that had nothing to do with the explosion. They followed the creek until the sun touched the western horizon, until Tabitha's legs felt like water and her vision swam at the edges, until even Jacob's iron will began to show cracks. "Here," he said finally, leading her out of the water and up onto the bank. "We'll stop here for the night." It wasn't much, a hollow between roots of a massive cottonwood, sheltered from view, hidden from anyone who wasn't looking directly at it. But it was dry, and it was safe, and that was enough. Tabitha collapsed onto the ground, every muscle screaming. Jacob dropped down beside her, his breathing harsh and labored. In the fading light she could see how pale he was, how carefully he held himself. "Your ribs," she said. "Let me see." "It's nothing." "Jacob Vaughn, if you tell me one more time that something is nothing when it clearly isn't, I'm going to hit you myself and make it worse." Her voice shook, from exhaustion, from fear, from the sudden overwhelming awareness of how close they'd come to dying today. "Please, let me see." He hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he unbuttoned his shirt. The bruising across his left side made her gasp, purple and black and spreading, covering his ribs like spilled ink. "That's not nothing," she said, her hands hovering over the injury, afraid to touch, afraid to cause more pain. "Probably cracked, maybe broken." Jacob's jaw clenched. "But there's nothing we can do about it out here except bind it and keep moving. We need to get you to a doctor. We need to get to Fort Laramie. After that—" He stopped, looked at her. "After that, I don't know." The words hung between them, heavy with all the uncertainty of their situation. They'd escaped Porter today, but he was still out there, still hunting, and Jacob was injured, slowing down, becoming a liability. "Don't," Tabitha said. "Don't what? Don't think about leaving me, about disappearing to keep me safe." She moved closer, careful of his ribs. "Don't think I can't see that calculation in your eyes. You'd be safer without me. I'd be alone without you. There's a difference." Her hand found his face, traced the line of his jaw. "I didn't fight this hard to survive, just to watch you walk away. Tabitha, I love you." The words fell into the space between them. Simple, impossible, true. Jacob stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "You can't," he said finally. "You can't love me. I'm a wanted man, a killer. I've got nothing to offer you except danger and running, and you've got yourself to offer me. That's all I want." She leaned in close, so close she could feel his breath on her face, could see the war happening behind his eyes. "I love you, Jacob Vaughn. And you can tell me that's foolish or impossible or dangerous all you want. It doesn't change the truth of it. I was paid to escort you west," he said, his voice rough, raw. "That's all this was supposed to be. A job, a debt repaid." And somewhere on that trail, what happened? My heart took an unplanned turn. The words came out like a confession, like something torn from deep inside him. God help me, Tabitha, but I love you too. Have loved you since the moment you walked into that saloon and refused to let me get myself killed. Maybe even before that. She kissed him. Gentle this time. Mindful of his ribs, of his injuries. But full of everything she felt, everything she couldn't find words for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "What are we going to do?" he asked. Not the guide asking his client. Just a man asking the woman he loved. "We're going to Fort Laramie," she said. "We're going to find a way to clear your name. And we're going to build a life together somehow. I don't know how yet. But we'll figure it out." You make it sound simple. It is simple. The rest is just details. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Do you trust me?" "With my life." "Then trust me with this. Trust me when I say we're going to be all right." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her close, careful of his ribs, and held her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "All right," he said finally. "We do it your way. We go to Fort Laramie. We figure it out together." "Together," she repeated. The word tasted like a promise. Like hope. They sat like that as darkness fell completely. Two people in the middle of nowhere, injured and exhausted and hunted. But together. And somehow, that made all the difference. Later, when Jacob finally consented to let her bind his ribs with strips torn from her petticoat, when they'd shared the last of their water, and what little food remained in Jacob's pack, Tabitha asked the question that had been nagging at her. Porter mentioned tracks. In the mine. How did he know which way we'd gone? Jacob's expression went grim. He didn't. He lied. Tried to draw us out by making us think we were cornered. But we were cornered. We were trapped. There's a difference. He settled back against the tree trunk, wincing. Trapped means you've got no good options. Cornered means you've got no options at all. Porter wanted us to think we were cornered. Make us panic. Make us do something stupid. Like running out into the open where he could shoot us. Exactly. Jacob's hand found hers in the darkness. You did good today. Better than good. You stayed calm under fire, didn't freeze, didn't panic. That's rare, Tabitha. Rarer than you know. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. He squeezed her hand. Your father would be proud. The mention of her father sent a pang through her chest. What must he be thinking right now? He'd sent her west with a trusted guide, expecting regular letters, expecting her safe arrival in Oregon. Instead, she was hiding in the wilderness with a wanted man, being hunted by killers, falling in love with the very person she was supposed to be protected from. I should write to him, she said. When we reach Fort Laramie, let him know I'm all right. Are you going to tell him everything? I don't know. Should I? Jacob was quiet. He'll understand about Porter, about the bounty. He knew I had a past when he hired me. But the rest... He stopped. You falling in love with a criminal. That might be harder for him to accept. Then he'll have to find a way to accept it. Because I'm not giving you up, Jacob. Not for him. Not for anyone. The fierce certainty in her voice surprised even her. When had she become this person? This woman who defied convention and common sense and everything she'd been raised to be. Somewhere between Boston and Wyoming. Somewhere between silk dresses and saddle leather. Somewhere between who she'd been expected to become and who she actually was. We should sleep, Jacob said. Long day tomorrow. We'll need to cover a lot of ground if we want to reach Fort Laramie before Porter picks up our trail again. Will he? Eventually. Men like Porter don't give up. Not when they've invested this much time, this much pride. Jacob's voice went hard. But maybe by then, we'll have enough of a lead. Maybe we can lose him in the crowds at the fort. And if we can't, then we deal with him. Permanently if necessary. He looked at her. Does that scare you, knowing I might have to kill him? Tabitha thought about it. Really thought about it. A week ago, the idea would have horrified her. Murder was murder regardless of circumstances or justifications. But now, after everything she'd seen, everything she'd survived, she understood something her Boston self never could have. Sometimes the world was cruel. Sometimes good people had to do terrible things. Sometimes survival meant crossing lines you never thought you'd cross. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't scare me. What scares me is the thought of him killing you because you hesitated. Because you tried to be merciful to someone who doesn't deserve it." "So you're saying—" "I'm saying do what you have to do. And I'll stand beside you, whatever comes next." Jacob pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "How did I get so lucky?" "You didn't. You got stubborn. There's a difference." But she smiled as she said it, settled into the warmth of his body, careful of his ribs. They fell asleep like that, under the stars, in the wilderness. Two people who'd found something neither one had been looking for. Love in the most unlikely of places, born from danger and dust and desperation. But real nonetheless. Maybe even more real because of where it came from. And tomorrow, when the sun rose and they started walking again toward Fort Laramie, and whatever waited there, they'd face it together. The way they'd face everything from now on. Together. Dawn came cold and gray. Tabitha woke to find Jacob already up, standing at the edge of their shelter, scanning the landscape with the wariness of a man who'd spent too many years being hunted. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, sitting up. Her body protested every movement, muscles she didn't know she had screamed in complaint. "Couple hours." He didn't turn around. "Wanted to make sure Porter wasn't on our trail yet." And nothing, no sign of him. Either he's still searching that mine, or he's smart enough to know we'd follow the creek and he's waiting downstream. Jacob finally looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Like I got thrown by an explosion and spent yesterday running for my life." "So about average for this trip." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Can you walk?" "I can walk." "Then we should get moving. Fort Laramie is still a day and a half away on foot. Maybe less if we can find horses." They set out as the sun broke through the clouds. Jacob set a slower pace than yesterday, mindful of his ribs of her exhaustion. But they still covered ground steadily, following game trails, avoiding open spaces where they'd be visible from a distance. Tabitha found herself watching him as they walked, the careful way he moved, the slight catch in his breathing when the terrain forced him to climb, the stubborn set of his jaw that said he'd keep going no matter how much it hurt. "You need to rest," she said after the third hour. "I need to get you to safety. Jacob, your ribs will heal or they won't. Either way, stopping now doesn't help us." He paused at the top of a rise, one hand pressed to his side. "We rest when we reach the fort, not before. You're going to kill yourself trying to protect me." "Better me than you." The casual way he said it made her want to shake him. This infuriating, noble, stubborn man who'd somehow convinced himself that his life mattered less than hers. "Listen to me," she said, moving to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Your life is not expendable. You are not just some hired guide anymore. You're the man I love, and I need you alive. Not as a corpse who died protecting me, but alive, breathing, standing beside me. Do you understand?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of acceptance. "I'm not used to someone caring if I live or die." "Well, get used to it, because I care, very much." She reached up, touched his face. "So we're going to rest, right here, for 20 minutes. You're going to sit down and let your body recover. And then we'll keep moving. Together, both of us intact." "Agreed." Jacob looked like he wanted to argue. Then he glanced down at where his hand pressed against his ribs and seemed to accept the inevitable. 20 minutes, he said. Not a second more. They settled in the shade of an outcropping. Jacob lowered himself carefully to the ground, his face tight with pain. Tabitha sat beside him close enough to feel the heat from his body, close enough to offer silent support. "Tell me about Oregon," Jacob said after a moment. "What you were planning to do there, before all this." "I was supposed to stay with my Aunt Martha in Portland. She runs a boarding house for young women, respectable, safe." Tabitha smiled despite everything. "My father thought it would be a good place for me to write, to find independence without being completely on my own." "You're a writer." "Trying to be. I've published a few stories in magazines back east, nothing significant. But I wanted to write something bigger, a novel maybe, about the West." She laughed, the sound brittle. "Though I don't think my father imagined I'd get quite this much research material." "What were you going to write about?" "I don't know anymore. I thought I'd write about noble frontiersmen and romantic adventures, the kind of stories people back east want to believe about the West." She looked at him. "But that's not what the West is it?" "No," Jacob said quietly. "It's not. The West is beautiful and brutal. It's freedom and violence. It's second chances and unforgiving consequences. It's—" He stopped searching for words. "It's honest, I guess. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Like you. Like me." He met her eyes. "Would you still write about it, knowing what you know now?" "Yes, but I'd write the truth, not the fantasy." Her hand found his. "I'd write about a woman who thought she knew what courage was and discovered she didn't. About a man who tried to outrun his past and found something worth standing still for. About two people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and refused to let that stop them. That's our story. That's our story." They sat in silence for a while. The 20 minutes Jacob had agreed to stretched into 30, then 40. But Tabitha didn't mention it, and neither did he. Just held each other's hands and gathered strength for whatever came next. Finally, Jacob stirred. "We should move. Sun's getting high. We need to cover more ground before it gets too hot." They walked through the afternoon heat. Tabitha's canteen ran dry around midday. Jacob gave her half of what remained in his. It wasn't enough. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Her lips cracked and bled. But she kept walking. "There," Jacob said, suddenly pointing. "See that line of green? That's cottonwoods. Means water. We'll refill there." The promise of water gave her new energy. They picked up the pace, reached the trees in another half hour. A small stream bubbled between rocks. Clear, cold, perfect. Tabitha dropped to her knees and drank until her stomach ached. Jacob did the same, then refilled both canteens. "How much further?" she asked. "If we keep this pace, we'll reach Fort Laramie by tomorrow afternoon." Jacob studied the sun's position. "But we need to talk about what happens when we get there." "What do you mean?" "I mean there might be law at the fort, soldiers, maybe even someone who recognizes me." He turned to face her fully. "You need to be prepared for the possibility that I'll be arrested, that this ends with me in chains." "No." The word came out fierce. "Absolute. We didn't survive Porter just to hand you over to the law. It might not be our choice. Then we make it our choice. We find someone who will listen, someone who will hear the truth about Samuel Garrett and what really happened." Tabitha stood, energy flooding through her despite the exhaustion. "Your father said he had friends in the territory. Influential friends. Maybe one of them can help." "My father's been dead for 15 years. But his friends aren't. And men don't forget someone who saved their life, just like you didn't forget my father." She grabbed his hands. "There has to be someone at Fort Laramie who knows the truth. Who knows Samuel Garrett was a monster and you were just trying to help his wife." Jacob looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You really believe that?" "I have to believe it, because the alternative is unacceptable." He pulled her close, careful of his ribs, and kissed her forehead. "All right," he said. "We try it your way. We go to Fort Laramie, and we look for help. But Tabitha," his voice went serious, "if it goes wrong, If they arrest me, you don't fight them. You don't try to defend me. You let them take me, and you get yourself to your aunt's place in Portland. Live your life. Write your stories. Promise me. I'm not promising anything that involves me abandoning you. Tabitha. No. She pulled back, met his eyes. You don't get to make me promise to give up on you. We're in this together. Remember? That was the deal. The deal was I get you to Oregon safely. The deal changed the moment we fell in love. Now it's both of us to Oregon. Both of us safe. Both of us free. Her voice shook but held firm. So stop trying to prepare me for a future without you in it, because that's not a future I'm willing to accept. Jacob stared at her. Then slowly he started to smile. Not the ghost of a smile from before, but something real, something that transformed his entire face. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I learned from the best, she smiled back. Now come on, we've got a fort to reach and a name to clear. They walked until darkness made continuing dangerous, made camp in a small hollow. No fire again, cold food and water. But they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Tabitha woke in the deepest part of night to find Jacob sitting up, one hand on his revolver, eyes fixed on something in the darkness. What is it? She whispered. Thought I heard something. Probably just an animal, but... He stopped. There. You hear that? She held her breath. Listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint and distant, the sound of horses. Multiple horses. Moving through the night. Porter, she breathed. Maybe. Or could be travelers heading to the fort. But Jacob was already moving, already gathering their few belongings. We can't take the chance. We need to move, now. They fled through the darkness for the second time in as many days. But this time, Jacob led them toward the sounds, not away from them. What are you doing? Tabitha hissed. If that's a group of travelers, we can join them. Safety in numbers. If it's Porter... He didn't finish the thought. Didn't need to. They crept through brush and shadow until they could see the riders. 6 men. Rough-dressed. Armed. Leading pack horses laden with supplies. Not Porter. Prospectors, Jacob murmured. Heading to the fort to sell whatever they've pulled out of the mountains. They look harmless enough. Are we going to approach them? At night they'd shoot us before we got within 20 feet. No, we wait until morning. Follow them at a distance. If they seem trustworthy, we approach them in daylight. He pulled her back into the shadows. For now we rest. Take turns keeping watch. Make sure those men are the only ones out here tonight. But sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made Tabitha's heart race. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. She kept her hand on the rifle Jacob had given her, finger near the trigger, ready for whatever came. Nothing came. The prospectors broke camp at dawn. Jacob and Tabitha followed at a discreet distance, watching to see if the men were truly what they appeared to be. By mid-morning, Jacob seemed satisfied. All right, he said. Let's try this. But let me do the talking. And if anything feels wrong, you get behind me and you stay there. Understood? Understood. They approached the group openly, hands visible, moving slow. Jacob called out when they were still 50 yards away. Hello, the Camp 2 travelers looking to join you for the road to Fort Laramie. The prospectors stopped. Hands went to weapons. An older man with a gray beard stepped forward. That's close enough, friend. State your business. My name's Jacob Vaughn. This is Miss Tabitha King. We're heading to Fort Laramie, same as you. Ran into some trouble with bandits a few days back. Lost our horses and most of our supplies. Jacob kept his voice calm, reasonable. We're not asking for charity. Just the safety of traveling with a larger group. And I can hunt, contribute to the evening meals. The gray-bearded man studied them. His eyes lingered on Tabitha's torn dress, her bruised face, the way she held herself like someone who'd been through hell and survived it. Bandits, you say? 3 men. led by someone named Porter. You know him? Several of the prospectors exchanged glances. The gray-bearded man spat. We know him. Porter and his crew have been preying on travelers for years. Law can't seem to catch him. His expression softened slightly. You two look like you've had a rough time of it. I'm sorry for that. But... He paused. We've only got 2 rules for traveling with us. First, you pull your weight. Second, you bring no trouble to our door. Can you agree to that? Jacob hesitated. Tabitha could see the war happening behind his eyes. The rule about bringing no trouble was exactly what he couldn't promise. Not with a bounty on his head. Not with Porter somewhere behind them. But before Jacob could speak, Tabitha stepped forward. We can agree to that, she said firmly. And we're grateful for your kindness. The gray-bearded man nodded. Name's Coleman. These are my boys and my crew. We've been working a claim up in the mountains the past 6 months, heading to the fort to resupply and sell what we've found. He gestured toward the group. You can walk with us. We've got some extra food you can have. As for horses, he shrugged. Can't help you there, but Fort Laramie's only a day's walk from here. You'll make it. Thank you, Tabitha said. Truly. They fell in with the prospectors. Coleman proved to be a talker full of stories about the territory and the various characters who populated it. His crew was quieter but friendly enough. They shared jerky and hardtack passed around a canteen of water that tasted faintly of whiskey. Jacob stayed alert, eyes constantly scanning their back trail, looking for signs of Porter. But as the hours passed with no sign of pursuit, some of the tension eased from his shoulders. You think we lost him? Tabitha asked quietly as they walked. I think he's still looking. But maybe we've got enough of a lead now. Maybe with Coleman's group we'll make it to the fort before he catches up. And then we find someone who can help us. Someone who knew my father, or who knew the truth about Samuel Garrett. Someone with enough influence to matter. He glanced at her. Your idea, remember, I'm just following your lead. Strange how that worked out. What? You were hired to guide me. Now I'm guiding you. She smiled despite her exhaustion. My father would find that amusing. Your father would probably shoot me for falling in love with his daughter. My father is more understanding than you give him credit for. Besides, she moved closer, let their hands brush together. I think he always hoped I'd find someone real. Someone who wouldn't let me hide behind books and pretty words. Someone who'd challenge me to be brave. I didn't make you brave. You were always brave. You just needed something worth being brave for. The words settled into her chest warm and true. They reached Fort Laramie as the sun touched the western horizon. The fort sprawled across the landscape, a mix of military buildings and civilian structures. Soldiers drilled in the parade ground. Wagons crowded the trading posts, people everywhere moving with purpose and energy. Safety. Or at least the illusion of it. Coleman's group headed toward the trading post to conduct their business. He shook Jacob's hand before they parted. Good luck to you both, he said. Whatever trouble you're running from, I hope you find a way through it. You knew, Jacob asked. I've been in the territory long enough to recognize a man with a past. Coleman's eyes were kind, but knowing. But I've also been around long enough to know the difference between a bad man and a good man who did a bad thing. You strike me as the latter. He tipped his hat to Tabitha. Take care of each other. Then he was gone, leaving them standing at the edge of the fort, looking at the chaos of civilization after days in the wilderness. Where do we start? Tabitha asked. Commander's office. If anyone knows about my case, it'll be him, and if anyone has the authority to help... Jacob stopped. No, wait, there's someone else. Someone my father mentioned in his letters. A judge. Judge Nathaniel Blackwood. He was my father's friend. Served with him in the war. Is he here? Last I heard he was circuit judge for this territory. If we're lucky, he's in residence at the fort. If not... Jacob's jaw set. Then we wait for him, however long it takes. They made their way through the fort, asking questions, following directions. Finally, a soldier pointed them toward a small building near the commander's quarters. "Judge is in today," the soldier said. "But he's busy. You'll have to wait your turn." They waited on a bench outside the judge's chambers. Tabitha's stomach churned with nerves. Everything depended on this. On whether this judge remembered Jacob's father, on whether he'd be willing to listen, on whether the truth would be enough to set Jacob free. An hour passed, then another. The sun set completely. Lamps were lit throughout the fort. Finally, the door opened. A clerk emerged. "Judge Blackwood will see you now." They stood. Jacob took Tabitha's hand, squeezed it once. "Whatever happens," he started. "Together," she finished. "Remember." They walked into the judge's chambers hand in hand. The man behind the desk was older, 60s maybe, silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up as they entered, and his gaze went immediately to Jacob. Stayed there. Something flickered across his features. Recognition. "My God," Judge Blackwood said. "You're Richard Vaughn's boy. I'd know those eyes anywhere. You look just like your father did at your age." Jacob's hand tightened on Tabitha's. "You knew him." "Knew him, son. Your father saved my life at Shiloh. Took a bullet meant for me. I've owed the Vaughn family a debt for 30 years. The judge stood, came around the desk. "I heard you were in trouble. Heard about the warrant. Samuel Garrett's friends made sure everyone knew." His expression hardened. "I also made it my business to learn the truth about what happened. About Sarah Garrett. About what that bastard did to her. Then you know. I know you killed a man who deserved killing. I know the law says that's murder, but justice says otherwise." Judge Blackwood moved to a cabinet, pulled out papers. "I've been working on this for 2 years. Gathering affidavits. Testimonies from people who witnessed Samuel Garrett's abuse. Medical reports from the doctor who treated Sarah's injuries." He spread the papers across his desk. "I have everything I need to overturn that warrant, to clear your name completely." Tabitha felt Jacob sway beside her. She gripped his hand tighter, keeping him upright. "Why?" Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" "Because your father was a good man who raised a good son. Because Sarah Garrett deserved justice. And because—" The judge's eyes softened. "Because I made a promise to your father before he died. I promised him that if you ever needed help, I'd move heaven and earth to provide it. He never told me." He wouldn't have. Richard Vaughn was the kind of man who did good things quietly, who helped people without asking for recognition or repayment. Judge Blackwood picked up his pen. "Now, I need you to tell me everything that happened that night. Every detail. And then I'm going to sign these papers, file them with the territorial governor, and by this time tomorrow you'll be a free man." Jacob looked at Tabitha. She saw the disbelief in his eyes, the hope that he was afraid to hold on to, the beginning of something that looked like freedom. "Tell him," she said softly. "Tell him everything." So Jacob did. He told the judge about finding Sarah in the barn, about confronting Samuel Garrett, about the fight the gun the moment everything changed. He told it all without embellishment or excuse. Just the truth, plain and simple. Judge Blackwood listened without interruption. When Jacob finished, the judge was quiet for a long moment. "You did what any decent man would have done," he said finally. "You tried to help someone who desperately needed it. The fact that it cost you 3 years of running, 3 years of being hunted." He shook his head. "That's the real injustice here." He signed the papers with swift, decisive strokes, affixed his seal, looked up at them. "It's done. As of this moment, there is no warrant for your arrest, no bounty on your head. You're free, Jacob Vaughn. Free to live your life without looking over your shoulder." The words didn't seem real, couldn't be real. But the judge was smiling, and the papers were signed, and Jacob was standing there looking like a man who'd just been given back his life. "I don't know what to say," Jacob managed. "Say you'll live well. Say you'll honor your father's memory by being the man he raised you to be." Judge Blackwood's eyes moved to Tabitha. "And say you'll take care of this young woman who clearly loves you enough to walk through fire for you." "I will," Jacob said, his voice stronger now. "I promise, I will." They left the judge's chambers in a daze, stepped out into the night air of Fort Laramie. The same fort they'd entered an hour ago, but everything had changed. Everything was different. Jacob pulled Tabitha into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "It's over," he said. "God, Tabitha, it's really over." "It's over," she repeated, and felt tears streaming down her face. Relief. Joy. The release of tension she'd been carrying for days. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd survived impossible odds, who'd found each other against all logic and reason, who'd refused to let fear or danger or bounty hunters destroy what they'd built. Finally, Jacob pulled back, looked at her with eyes that held nothing but love and gratitude and promise. "I was paid to escort you west," he said softly. "But somewhere on that trail my heart took an unplanned turn." "So did mine," Tabitha said. "So did mine." And there, in the lamplight of Fort Laramie, surrounded by strangers and soldiers and the noise of a frontier fort, Jacob Vaughn kissed the woman he loved. The woman who'd saved him as surely as he'd protected her. The woman he was going to spend the rest of his life proving worthy of. They found a small boarding house near the fort where the proprietor asked no questions, and the rooms were clean enough. Jacob paid for 2 rooms, but they only used one, neither willing to spend the night apart, after everything they'd survived. Tabitha fell asleep in his arms, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window, and Jacob, already dressed, standing by the door with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Morning," he said. His smile was different now, lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thought I'd let you sleep. You've earned it." "What time is it?" "Nearly 9. I went to the telegraph office at dawn. Sent a message to your father. Told him you're safe, that we're at Fort Laramie, and that you'll write him a proper letter soon." He paused. "Also told him there were some complications with the journey. Figured you'd want to explain the rest yourself." Tabitha sat up, pushing hair from her face. "What did you tell him about us?" "Nothing yet. That's your news to share, not mine." Jacob moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "But Tabitha, you need to think about this. Really think about it. Your father sent you west to build a respectable life, to write, to marry well eventually, not to fall in love with a former criminal who spent 3 years running from the law. Former being the key word. Judge Blackwood cleared you. You're free. I'm free of the warrant, but I'm not free of my past. People will still know what I did, still judge me for it." His hand found hers. "I won't let you sacrifice your reputation, your future, because you think you love me." "I don't think I love you, Jacob Vaughn. I know I love you. There's a difference." She squeezed his hand. "And as for my reputation, my future, those are mine to decide. Not my father's. Not society's. Mine. Your father won't approve. My father saved your life once because he believed you deserved a second chance. I have to believe he'll understand that I'm giving you a third, fourth, however many chances it takes." She met his eyes. "And if he doesn't, if he refuses to accept us, then I'll find a way to live with that. But I won't live without you. Not now. Not after everything." Jacob studied her face like he was memorizing it. Then he leaned in and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. "We should get married," he said when they finally broke apart. Tabitha's heart stuttered. "What?" "We should get married. Here at Fort Laramie, before we continue to Oregon, before we face your father and your aunt and whatever judgment they bring." Jacob's voice was steady, certain. I want you to be my wife, Tabitha. Not someday in the distant future, but now. Today, if possible. Tomorrow at the latest. That's very sudden. Is it? We've spent every moment of the past 2 weeks together. We've faced death, survived bounty hunters, fallen in love in the middle of the wilderness. What more do we need to know about each other? He cupped her face in his hands. I know you're brave and stubborn and impossibly kind. I know you don't give up even when you should. I know you see the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. And I know I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Tears welled in her eyes. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me. Then say yes. Marry me. Not because you feel obligated, not because we've been through something traumatic together, but because you want to. Because you can imagine building a life with me. I can imagine it, she whispered. I've been imagining it since the night we hid in those rocks and you held my hand in the darkness. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She pulled him close, kissed him hard. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever we can make it happen. Yes. Jacob's laugh was pure joy. He lifted her, spun her around despite his still healing ribs, and kissed her until they were both breathless. They found a chaplain at the fort who agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon. No fancy dress, no elaborate preparations. Just Tabitha in the cleanest dress she had left, and Jacob in clothes borrowed from Coleman's crew. The chaplain's wife served as witness. Judge Blackwood appeared halfway through, apparently having heard about the wedding through the fort's efficient gossip network. Couldn't miss this, the judge said, his eyes twinkling. Your father would have wanted someone here who knew him, who could tell him his son married well. The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows spoken in a small chapel that smelled of pine and candle wax. Jacob's hand trembled slightly as he slid a plain gold band onto her finger, a ring purchased that morning from a trader who asked too many questions and received too few answers. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her like she was the air he needed to breathe, like she was everything he'd ever wanted and never thought he'd have. Mrs. Vaughn, he murmured against her lips. Mrs. Vaughn, she repeated, testing how it sounded. Decided she loved it. They spent their wedding night in that same small boarding house room. Made love slowly, carefully learning each other with hands and mouths, and whispered promises. Afterward, they lay tangled together talking about the future in voices soft with wonder. We need to decide where we're going, Jacob said. Oregon was your plan, your aunt, your new life. But now it's our life, Tabitha finished. And I don't need to go to Portland anymore. I don't need to stay with Aunt Martha or live in her respectable boarding house. You're sure you were so determined to get there? I was determined to escape Boston, to find freedom and independence and a place where I could be myself. She traced the line of his jaw with her finger. I found all of that with you. The location doesn't matter. What if we found our own place? Jacob said quietly. There's land opening up in Colorado. River valleys where a man could raise horses, build a ranch. It wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be comfortable at first, but it would be ours. You want to raise horses? I've always been good with them, and there's a market for quality mounts, especially with more people coming west every year. He shifted to look at her. But that's my dream. What about yours? Your writing. I can write anywhere. In fact, I think I'd write better somewhere quiet, somewhere I could observe real life instead of imagining it. Tabitha smiled. A ranch in Colorado sounds perfect. Hard work and wide open spaces, and you. Everything I need. You're sure no regrets about giving up city life? The only regret I have is that we wasted 2 weeks dancing around our feelings when we could have been doing this. She kissed him. So yes, I'm sure. Let's go to Colorado. Let's build something together. They left Fort Laramie 3 days later. Not running this time, not fleeing danger. Just two people on horseback heading toward a future they'd build with their own hands. Judge Blackwood had helped them purchase horses and supplies, pressed money into Jacob's hand despite his protests. "Your father would have wanted you to have a good start," the judge insisted. "Consider it a wedding gift, and a payment on the debt I owe the Vaughn family. You've already paid that debt 10 times over. Then consider it an investment. I expect an invitation when you've got that ranch built. Want to see what Richard Vaughn's son makes of himself." They'd also dealt with Porter. The bounty hunter had appeared at the fort the day after the wedding, looking worse for wear and furious at having lost his quarry. But Judge Blackwood had been waiting for him. Tabitha hadn't witnessed the conversation, but Jacob told her about it afterward. How the judge had informed Porter that the warrant was rescinded, the bounty canceled. How Porter had tried to argue, tried to claim he'd already invested too much time and money to walk away empty-handed. How the judge had calmly informed him that continued harassment of Jacob Vaughn would result in Porter himself being arrested for assault, attempted murder, and destruction of property at the old mining camp. Porter had left Fort Laramie that same day, heading back to whatever hole he'd crawled out of, beaten but not broken. Jacob said they'd probably cross paths again someday. "Men like Porter don't forget," he'd said. "Don't forgive." "Then we'll deal with him if that day comes," Tabitha had replied. Together. Now they rode south toward Colorado, taking their time, no longer racing against danger or death, just traveling at a pace that let them appreciate the land around them, the sky above them, each other. They stopped for lunch beside a creek that ran clear and cold. Jacob caught 2 fish with his hands, a trick he'd learned as a boy. Tabitha watched him work, marveling at the difference in him now that the weight of the bounty was gone. He smiled more, laughed easier, touched her constantly, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real and his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her stare. "How different you are now. How much lighter. I spent 3 years waiting to die. Now I get to spend the rest of my life learning how to live." He came to sit beside her. "That's your gift to me, Tabitha. You didn't just believe in my innocence. You believed in my future. In our future. You gave me the same gift. I came west thinking I needed to prove something, that I needed to be independent and strong and fearless all on my own." She leaned against his shoulder. "But you taught me that strength isn't about being alone. It's about finding someone you trust enough to be vulnerable with." They reached the Colorado Territory 2 weeks later. Spent days exploring valleys and rivers looking for the right place, the place that would become home. They found it on a Tuesday in late September, a valley where a river ran wide and shallow, perfect for watering livestock, where grass grew thick and green, where mountains rose to the east providing shelter from the worst storms, where cottonwoods clustered near the water and meadows stretched toward distant horizons. "This is it," Jacob said, standing in the stirrups surveying the land. "This is where we build." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He dismounted, held his hand up to help her down. "What do you think?" Tabitha looked around, tried to imagine a house here, corrals for horses, maybe a garden near the river, a porch where she could sit and write while watching the sunset. "I think it's perfect," she said. "I think it's home." They filed a claim with the land office in the nearest town, purchased lumber and tools and supplies. Jacob proved handy with an axe and hammer. Within weeks, the skeleton of a cabin began to rise near the river. Tabitha helped where she could. Learned to drive nails without hitting her thumb more than occasionally. Learned to cut lumber to precise lengths. Learned that building something with your own hands was harder and more satisfying than anything she'd ever done. They worked through autumn as the leaves turned gold and red, through the first frosts of winter, through days when their breath steamed and their fingers went numb. By Christmas they had 4 walls, a roof, and a door that actually closed. Not fancy, not finished, but shelter. Home. That night they slept in their own cabin for the first time, on a mattress stuffed with grass and covered with blankets. a fire crackling in the hearth Jacob had built stone by stone. "We did it," Tabitha said, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams above them. "We actually built a house." "We built a home," Jacob corrected. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "A house is just walls and a roof. A home is where you build your life, where you raise your family, where you grow old together." He rolled to face her. "This is our home, Tabitha. The first thing that's ever been truly ours." She kissed him. The first of many things. Winter passed slowly. They spent those months finishing the cabin, building furniture, planning where the corrals would go, where the barn would stand. Jacob rode to town twice to trade and gather supplies. Each time he returned with stories about settlers moving into the valley, about the town growing, about opportunities for a man with horse sense and a strong back. In February, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks. The morning sickness, the exhaustion that hit her like a physical weight. The way her body felt different, changed preparing for something momentous. She told Jacob on a Tuesday evening as they sat by the fire. He'd been carving a piece of wood, making a handle for a new axe. She'd been pretending to read, but mostly just gathering courage. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." He looked up. Must have heard something in her voice, because his expression shifted to concern. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine. She took a breath. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The carving fell from his hands. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "A baby. A baby. Probably due in late summer if my calculations are correct." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Jacob crossed the small cabin in 2 strides, dropped to his knees in front of her chair, put his hands on her stomach like he could feel the life growing there. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "God, Tabitha, we're having a baby." "Are you happy?" "Happy." He laughed, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I have no idea how to be a father. But yes, I'm happy. I'm so damn happy I could burst with it." He pulled her close, held her like she was made of glass, like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We're going to need a bigger cabin," he said against her hair. "Eventually. But for now, this is enough." "I'm going to build you the best life I can," Jacob promised. "You and our child. I'm going to work until my hands bleed if that's what it takes. I'm going to make sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret choosing you. You're the best decision I ever made." Spring came with wildflowers and warm winds. Jacob worked from dawn until dusk building corrals, breaking horses he'd purchased from a ranch going under. Tabitha planted a garden, rode in the mornings when her energy was highest, watched her husband work, and felt contentment settle into her bones. In late April, a letter arrived from Boston. From her father. Tabitha opened it with shaking hands, afraid of what it might contain. Afraid he'd disown her for marrying without his permission, for choosing a man he'd never met as a suitor. But the letter was warm, worried certainly. Her father expressed concern about the dangers she'd faced, about Porter and the bounty hunters, and everything that could have gone wrong. But he also expressed something else. Pride. Pride that she'd found the courage to build her own life. Pride that Jacob had proven himself worthy of the second chance her father had given him all those years ago. And a request that they visit Boston once the baby was born, so he could meet his grandchild and welcome his new son-in-law properly into the family. Tabitha read the letter aloud to Jacob that night, watched his face as the words sank in, saw the moment he realized he'd been accepted, that he had a family again, a father-in-law who approved, a future that included more than just survival. "I'll take you to Boston," he said. "Next spring after the baby's old enough to travel. We'll visit your father, show him what we've built, prove to him that you chose well." "He already knows I chose well. He wouldn't have trusted you with my life if he thought otherwise." The baby came in August, a daughter with her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah, after the woman whose death had set Jacob on the path that led him to Tabitha. Jacob held his daughter with shaking hands. This man who'd faced down killers without flinching trembled at the weight of a 7-pound infant. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." "She's ours," Tabitha said, exhausted but happy. "Our daughter, our family." "Our family," Jacob repeated, testing how it sounded. Decided he loved it. They raised Sarah in that valley, raised horses that became known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. Tabitha wrote, published a book about her journey west that became a modest success back east. Wrote more books, stories about real people doing hard things. About courage that came not from bravado, but from love. Jacob never forgot where he came from. Never forgot Sarah Garrett or the price he'd paid for trying to help her. But he also never let his past define his future. He became known as a fair man, a good neighbor. Someone who'd help anyone who needed it, no questions asked. They had 2 more children. A son they named Richard after Jacob's father. Another daughter they called Martha after Tabitha's aunt, who finally visited when she was too old to make the journey comfortably, but too stubborn to miss meeting her great-nieces and nephew. The ranch grew, prospered, became the kind of place people pointed to and said, "That's what hard work and good love can build." On their 20th anniversary, Jacob took Tabitha to the spot where they'd first seen the valley, where they'd decided to put down roots and build a life. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up Boston, choosing this life." "Not for a single moment." She leaned against him, comfortable in the way of people who'd spent 2 decades learning each other's rhythms. "Do you regret that I insisted we keep going to Oregon? That I wouldn't let you disappear to keep me safe?" "I regret that I wasted even one day thinking I wasn't good enough for you. That I tried to prepare you for a future without me in it." Jacob turned her to face him, gray showing in his hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but still handsome, still hers. "But I don't regret a single moment since you told me you loved me, since you refused to give up on us." "I was paid to travel west," Tabitha said, echoing the words he'd spoken so long ago. "But somewhere on that trail, my heart took an unplanned turn." "So did mine," Jacob said. "Best turn I ever made." He kissed her as the sun set over the valley they'd built together, the home they'd created from nothing but determination and love and the stubborn refusal to let anyone tell them it couldn't be done. And somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Their daughter Sarah called to her brothers from the barn. Life continued around them, busy and beautiful and real. They'd started as stranger and client, became partners in survival, then lovers, then husband and wife, then parents, then 2 people who'd spent 20 years proving that love born in the most unlikely circumstances could be the strongest kind of all. Jacob Vaughn had been paid to escort Tabitha King to Oregon. But in the end, they'd both found something far more valuable than any amount of money. They'd found each other, found home, found a love that would last until their final breaths and beyond. And that was worth every danger they'd faced, every mile they'd traveled, every moment of fear and doubt and uncertainty. Because some journeys don't end where you expect them to. Some journeys lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. Together.